All right. I'm Kalyan Balaven. And again, for the inclusion factor, I'm here with my sister, Heidi Mirza. Professor Heidi Mirza has been teaching people for 40 years on intersectionality. She's a Black feminist scholar. She's written several books. And she was a part of a cohort of 35 Black women who've been highlighted for being academics in something called the Phenomenal Women. And she was the very first academic, very first person of color, very first Black woman to be highlighted in this way in England. And she's a global scholar, and I'm happy to have her here with us. I hope that was the right introduction, Heidi. I hope I did you.
Thank you. I think I love myself now. Oh, all right. Thank you, Cal.
Yeah. So, see, you made me forget my question, Heidi. Hold on. All right. Here goes the question. So, so we have a couple questions. I'm not asked. I know we are on time difference and everything. The first question I have is, how can schools truly achieve whole student inclusion?
That is a very big question, Cal. Whole student inclusion. I think if we had the magic pill for whole student inclusion, we would all be taking that pill. But that pill, a bit like our COVID vaccine, is very hard to find.
Right.
And it's the elusive factor, whole school inclusion. To be truly inclusive, is to have a place where everyone feels valued and belongs.
Yes.
Whatever race, whatever gender, whatever sexuality, your different abilities, that you have that sense in which you're valued, and that whatever you bring is something important to the school. So I think to find that place of acceptance, because that's what we're talking about, a place of acceptance where you're not judged by the color of your skin, by your sexuality, whether you're tall, fat, thin, all those physical characteristics, class characteristics. Class is very important in terms of, in Britain, we have a very strict class structure, and often our schools are based on who can afford certain schools and who can't.
That's right.
And the passing down through generations of privilege and cultures within those schools that can be quite cruel and bullying in order to get that privilege, to make you hard men. And go out to the colonies, that we have that kind of tradition here in Britain. I have seen a very inclusive school, and I'll tell you what the magic pill was. It was they would have the classes. So it was a school for mainly Muslim women in London, in the heart of the city, because Bangladeshis and a lot of Bangladeshis settled in the cities, and in London. This is where the banking, ironically, is. And the government realized that that these schools were the lowest achieving, the worst results, and they plowed money in something called the London Challenge. And they focused on these young women. And in particularly on young Bangladeshi women. And within one generation, they are now going to Oxford, Cambridge, and the very best universities.
Wow.
And I did some research in some of these schools. In fact, Michelle Obama came to visit one of these schools called Mulberry, Mulberry School. And she talked about, raising yourself up to be the best you can. But I don't think that's the neoliberal dream as well, raising yourself up. You do need to have these spaces where you feel safe, very safe. So they would have had classrooms. And remember, most of our teachers in Britain are white. This is a Muslim Bangladeshi school that they are running.
Right.
So it is possible for white staff to really transgress the cultural divide if there is mutual respect. And in these schools, what they did is they brought in the brightest and the best teachers that were just so good. And places like Hong Kong and Korea and whatever, they bring in the best teachers as well. So you've got a very high standard. And then the classes, if they were mixed ability, so they didn't stream or set or separate. So the girls who found reading and writing better would work with the dyslexic kids or kids with ADHD. They helped each other. It was like in the Caribbean, we had the monitorial system where older students helped younger students.
Yes.
It's a very old-fashioned model, but it works. So you would have mixed ability, and you also had parent liaison. They brought in the mothers, particularly and the fathers as well. And these would be not even literate parents. They had no schooling themselves. They'd be working in the restaurant sector in the cities or in the factories, clothes making and so on, sweatshops.
Wow.
So these parents were brought in. They had the older girls were brought back in as liaisons, went back out into the community, brought the parents in, and they would have things like, you would laugh at this, things like fruit carving for the mums. Everybody was into fruit carving. So what I'm saying, it became the school became part of the community became part of the school.
Yes.
And they used parents, maybe there was a retired older gentleman who came in, and this was a girls' school, and he was Bangladeshi, bit old-fashioned, but he brought those values into the school. They was challenged a lot. So I just think, and also the other bit of the magic pill was that everybody was respected. There was mutual respect. The girls they got their uniform. I thought that was quite interesting that they had uniform, because you couldn't tell who was poorer and who didn't. It was a kind of level playing field in terms of dress. I mean, maybe the trainers and the earrings did shine out, but so I just found it a place that I wish that I could have gone to school in.
Wow.
And maybe it doesn't quite answer your question, because you said a truly inclusive space, because it was largely Muslim girls' school.
True.
And they said that they didn't have the same discipline problems as some of the other tougher inner city schools. This is a tough inner city school, but they didn't, so they could spend more of their budget on this outreach, community outreach, and bringing the community in.
Right.
So, yeah. And every high expectations for everybody. And one of the things in my research in Young Female and Black and other bits of research that I've done through the 40 years you mentioned has always shown that low teacher expectations is not expecting somebody because you've judged them through your own racist bias, through your own prejudices, as not being good enough. From the very beginning. If that teacher in that classroom thinks, oh, you're from, like, your brother was in a gang, so you must be too, so I'm not going to waste my time on you, or I'm going to concentrate on students that I think are better than you. But in university and in schools, if that enthusiastic, wonderful teacher loves everybody equally, and that is possible, and doesn't judge them, then those children flourish. And I think so. Inclusion is about love, care, respect, and where you're not sure, where it's other cultures, it's that outreach, that asking questions, an open curiosity that the white teachers have for the community that they were in this Muslim school. It was powerful.
Wow, that's amazing. So I was going to ask you a second question more around bringing diversity in. Like, schools often use brochures, websites, and what I call brochurism was when they put the most diverse person on campus, often the Black student, the Latinx student, they put them on the cover, right, of the website, the brochure, and almost like every single page you might find that. But then, and you think, if you look outside looking in, oh, this place is relatively diverse, and you come there, you're like, where's that student? Oh, that student just graduated. Now you're the student, right? Sort of thing. So how do you, and schools, when I challenge schools on this, they say, well, if we don't do that, then we won't get the diversity in the first place. And so here's this interesting thing about diversity. It's in its relationship to inclusion, right? Like truly including someone is being very honest. You talked about love, empathy, respect. It's honest, it's truthful, but that's not honest, they're truthful, right? And so how do we do it?
Well, diversity, particularly since Black Lives Matter, I mean, here in Britain, but I'm sure in the States, because, that's the home of Black Lives Matter.
Yeah.
There is this huge rush to monetize diversity, to be right on, woke. We call it woke anti-racism.
Yes,
do you have that term there, woke?
Yeah, we do.
I think you probably invented it. So it's like being right on, being shown to do. And my very dear colleague, Sarah Ahmed, very powerful Black queer philosopher, she talks about, this performativity of diversity. We perform it, but we don't do it. Yeah. And she says where organizations, say they're not racist, and therefore they believe they're not racist, and therefore they're not racist. She says she calls it saying becomes doing.
Yes.
Say you're not racist, therefore you're doing diversity just by saying it.
Yeah.
And the brochures are part of that whole thing, right, where saying is doing, but you're not really doing.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. So I've been on, because I would often be the only person of color in the university for many years,
right,
especially in the 80s and the 90s. And I was the poster girl. Without my permission, they would take my picture. And I learned a lot about photography and permissions and copyright, because if someone takes your picture, they own your image and they can do with it what they like. And it's a huge minefield, really. And so my picture would just appear, and they were treating me like crap in the uni. And then suddenly I'm the poster girl, Yeah. And I would tell them to take it down on the website, and they would always say somebody else had put it up and it was a mistake, and they'll take it down, and then 2 weeks later it's still there. So there was this the whole dance around it's quite objectifying. I felt objectified, used, undervalued. So I had a feeling about it as well. A kind of colonial appropriation, really.
Yeah.
I was being appropriated.
Yeah.
And so, this is what whiteness can do. It sees you as a valuable object or as one to discard. And at the moment, like I'm saying, so how can we escape brochurism and be more honest? Well, if you're in an all-white organization, Oxford, Cambridge, and whatever, they need to say that they're a white organization. And what is very interesting, though, is that a lot of very high fee-paying students from the global south, or India, from China, from Africa, they want to buy into whiteness.
Yes. They
don't want to buy blackness. They are already. They want what the white folk have. They want to pay their children to go to elite universities. There's a complexity around it. So you want to keep your organization quite white, elite, established. This is the formal knowledge. This is the knowledge that will get you somewhere when you return to your country. So those parents are buying whiteness.
Yeah.
So there's a kind of a two-pronged thing to this brochurism. One
Yeah.
is woke and one is quite strategic, where they still want to keep their Harry Potter ivory towers.
Fair enough. Wow.
Yeah. And I don't know, for the poor people who buy into, when I say poor people, that we're duped into thinking a place is diverse when it's not.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a dishonesty. It's the opposite of what you said about inclusion. Inclusion is about honesty. We want to change, but the change has to come from the white folk, not by bringing in images and ideas of difference.
Right.
Yeah, it's painful.
Yeah.
I don't think people realize how painful it is to be used. It's abusive, actually.
Yeah. You're lured in, you're used, and you're used to lure others in.
Yes.
Right? Which is
like bait. We're bait.
Yeah, bait.
Bait. I never thought about it that way. Fish bait.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah.
Gracious.
It's rude. It's downright rude.
Yeah, fair enough. Well, my third question, I think we kind of covered too, because it was around faculty, but the same principles apply, right?
Yeah.
Idea of faculty diversity. Yeah.
I mean, one of the things that we talk about as faculty is the way that we're brought in, and the emotional exhaustion, the burnout that we suffer, because we become the change makers. We are expected to carry the burden of difference, of being all-knowing, of being the oracle that everyone runs to, including the students.
Yes.
And so when your white colleagues are going home for a glass of wine in the nice pub or the hills around where they live, you are still at work with a queue, a line outside your class, or outside your private room, or you're at work with students that they want you to help them with their essay. They want you to approve of their topic because it's going to be on diversity. They're always the students are always being said inevitably is about diversity, and the white members of staff go, oh, we don't know anything about that. Go and see Cal, go and see Heidi. So there's this sense in which you become this sponge. You just sap up all the issues, and it is exhausting. As I was saying before, it's demeaning. And you don't progress in your career. And then when you haven't got the right papers, you haven't written the work, your own research, you haven't been able to apply for grants, yourself to your students, they go like, well, you failed and you're not very good. And there's another example of a Black person that doesn't know, can't cut the mustard. You can't cut the mustard. So that's what we say in England.
I've heard the expression.
Have you heard it? What would you say? Cut the mustard.
I've heard it. I've never said that expression ever in my life, but I have heard it before, right? So
yeah, it means you can't step up to the plate.
Yeah, you can't step up to the plate.
Yeah, you're not good enough. But they don't see all the invisible work you do because you care, for your students.
Right.
So there is a whole issue around capacity, burnout capacity, and going back to the issue of representation, a lot of white organizations think that representation, just bringing in someone, will change the organization, change not just the image, but they've done their job. They've got their quotas of people of color in. And that doesn't change anything, because just getting people in, they've been doing it here in the media, suddenly, how many Black news readers do you have? How many Black professors do you have? How many Black students are you getting
Right.
in? So there's a sense in which they've done their job. But the
Right.
whiteness,
Right.
the power structures, the institution remains untouched. So we
Yeah.
are window dressing. And even if they get 10% of their members of staff are people of color,
Yeah.
the institution is still white. And I had a very interesting experience. I went to South Africa recently, and it was with the Mellon Foundation, the Andrew Mellon Foundation. And they wanted me to look at diversity and inclusion and what does it mean in different countries and different contexts. So in South Africa, you know, it's a majority Black country.
Right.
Was apartheid, brutal apartheid, and was liberated, you know, with Nelson Mandela. It's been 25 years now. And I visited all the campuses of the universities, different universities. And yes, you had a lot of students of color now, still a lot of white students, South African students coming from Eastern Europe and all sorts of places.
Oh, wow.
Interestingly, white students and members of staff.
Huh.
And you had a lot of Black vice chancellors, not all, many, and very senior people, Black academics from other African countries. But the institutions were still all
so the
white.
governors and the boards and the heads of school.
Yeah, the whole system. It became glaringly obvious. It's the same as in Britain and in America. Our institutions are based on a white male patriarchal concept of education.
Yes.
And the career structures in our universities complement a male life cycle, not a woman's, you know, and not people of color. It is something that they have mastered, literally. And in South Africa, you can go somewhere like UCT, you know, University of Cape Town, and it's like being built like a Greek temple with columns and pillars, a bit like, you know, like in America, Berkeley and all these places, you know, you've got that kind of concept of white high culture, Greek, Roman, you know, and that infrastructure and the architecture says everything. So you have Black people in powerful positions, but they're not Black organizations.
No.
They are white organizations. So what it's kind of representation is a front, like I was saying, window dressing, and everything still is run in a very elite way for the privileged, for the elites. And another shocking thing, and I think that I found, is that when I was walking around, I'd see Indian students together. You know, South Africa has a big Indian population. People don't realize that the British took Indians to Africa, to Sri Lanka, Fiji, you know, they took them from all these countries and to Trinidad and the Caribbean, where I'm from as well. Indians, there's Africans, they're what they call coloreds. These are all derogatory terms from the apartheid regime, because they separated people out geographically, and then they're whites and so on. And they mix separately. Like when you walk around, you'll see the white students together, you'll see the Black students together, you see the Indian students, and increasingly students from Asian students from the Far East, you know, and they were all in different friendship groups. They weren't mixing.
Wow.
That shocked me. So it goes back to inclusion, but it also speaks to the issue of institutional brochurism. You know, the institutions are still white, male, patriarchal institutions. Wow. And I think COVID and online move is going to shift this. This is a new terrain of struggle.
Interesting.
Going to shift it because 3-year degrees and that whole structure is going to change.
Yeah.
Because the job market has changed for young people. A degree no longer is very, you know,
Yes,
you
true.
don't get the return on the degree
That's
like you're
true.
used to.
That's true.
So that's going to drive change.
Yes.
These places need diversity, these institutions, and they need a different structure. It's going to
Yeah.
fundamentally change higher education and education going down.
Wow. Thank you, Heidi. I'm going to stop the recording here because you've given me so many tidbits, so many pieces, morsels for everyone that I may even separate this out into little pieces. But I'm gonna stop the recording right now. But thank you for everything.
Thank you, Cal.